Welcome back to another episode of the Bourbon Lens. This is your host, Jake and Scott, and today we're talking everything walking in Memphis. Yes, I did that. We're talking about BR Distilling, better known for all the people in the industry as Blue Note. They have rose to fame. They're growing quickly. And so today we are joined by Logan Welk, COO and president of the company. So sit back and buckle in to the latest episode of the Bourbon Lens. Logan, thank you for joining Scott and I this evening to talk all things Blue Note.
Thank you for having me. Great to be with you.
It's a long time coming. I think we've sampled whiskey from across the many years that you all have produced, and so I'm glad Aaron has beat us with a stick to make this happen.
I'm glad as well.
It's always good to have good PR, right?
Yes, it's also weird now to be in a position where you have PR people.
Yeah,
it's strange.
Definitely. Well, excited because Scott will tell you I'm a big French oak fan, so I will be sipping on the Crossroads. And in the background of tonight's conversation, Scott's got some whiskey himself, and we're going to focus in really on the conversation of what's happening in Memphis, because literally you all are walking out a dream and growing a company there. But for those people who aren't familiar with Blue Note or BR Distilling as your kind of holding company, can you give us a background, Logan, on just how the brand came to be?
Yep. Yeah. So the early days of the company really didn't focus on the brand, which I think is important, but also a little bit different history than what most people would expect. So the first few years was focused exclusively on third-party storage, third-party bottling. So we worked with a lot of publicly traded companies, liquor brokers, some privately held companies, some celebrity companies, ultimately shipped to a little over 125 different DSPs across the U.S., shipped to some international partners as well, but really use that as sort of our stomping ground to learn the business side of the industry. Because while customers are pretty familiar with the marketing side and what people want you to see, they're not really aware of what goes on behind it, and really get that good understanding going into the pandemic. And then it was really from 21 forward is when the branded focus really kicked in. Blue Note as a brand has existed since really the fall of 18, but it was more of something in the background that was kind of there, but really didn't get a whole lot of focus. And it was seeing how other brands performed during the pandemic, some of their supply chain issues, seeing how we were able to overcome some of that, really, I think, accelerated some of our growth. Because while others were running out on shelf, we were starting to take some market share. And then you look at how the brand has really grown. So of what's available on the market today, you've got the Juke Joint, which is our 93 proof sort of everyday sipper, which what's really interesting about our company and puts me in a really fun position is most brand owners love to talk about how great their product is, but it's always, well, what can you actually point to show it's actually good? And I know some people like awards, some people don't like awards, but regardless, the Juke Joint and the Crossroads are now 3 years consecutive double gold winners at San Francisco. And if you know about awards, yes, there's a million out there. 99.9% of them don't really mean anything. San Francisco actually does. And for a company that is as young as we are, to not just hit double gold once, but to do 3 years in a row, hit platinum for 2 of the 6 brands to achieve platinum in the last few years, is really just incredible. And to have it associated with products that are at reasonable price points on the shelf every single day, really is a league that nobody else that we are aware of has really fallen into. And then you look at the additional SKU expansion of things like Uncut, the cast strength single barrel version, Ascot Double Platinum, number 7 in the world from Whiskey Advocate, our rye, which is also at 93 proof, double platinum winner from Ascot. It's like we couldn't hope for more from a marketing perspective. So it's just the elevation of those products, maintaining that price point, and really now for the first time ever starting the true sales and marketing focus of the company So people might be aware of us from what we've done in the past, but it's really incredible to know what we're on the verge of doing going forward.
Mm. Yeah, that's a meteoric rise to success.
Everything
And
seems overnight, but it's definitely not. There's a lot of
I
long
promise
nights
I've
in
been
there.
working for a while.
Yeah.
yeah, you've definitely got the whole thing because you yourself, right? And Scott called this out in our pre-show. You've worn multiple hats. You've been the money guy. You've been the operations guy. Now you're kind of overseeing more of the whole thing, right?
Yep.
That's got to be, early on. That's got to be like, to excuse my language for everyone, but like butthole clenching. To be
Oh, yeah.
honest, like you're a small company and you're working with all these different brands, and then you're like, oh hey, pandemic, we're going to focus on us now. That's got to be a big
Yeah.
shift.
No, I mean it was, and honestly, the model for that shift, it was called Project White Label. Like most things, it has some fun name, but it's like, how does it actually evolve? And it's nice as that progression going from CFO to COO to president to actually fully implement that thing that was drafted so early on.
Mm.
It's really nice to see it all come to fruition. Um, but no, I mean I think some people don't necessarily expect my background. I know we were talking about Memphis, but I worked at First Horizon here in Memphis, which is a pretty large bank holding company. Before that, I went to Rhodes for undergrad and grad school, so econ business, accounting masters. After I left First Horizon, I worked at KPMG for 7 years, doing audit, tax advisory, mostly financial services clients. Billed 100+ hours a week. And it's like, when you think about it, like how do you get so much experience? Like I'm only 35. I think I'm 35, born in 88. I lose track at this point, but you think back, I literally was working to the equivalent of 21 years of work experience in 7 years at KPMG. And it's like the type of exposure you get from that environment. And you leverage looking at what works, but also more importantly, what didn't work at small, medium, large companies. Left that to try to acquire a business. Learned a good lesson of the importance of legal and basic business documentation. Things that seem super simple can actually end up being extremely important later on. So that ended up falling through. Came into the business as CFO, which at the time, I think there had been around 400 cases of Blue Note sold. No version of the product that was being sold at that time is in existence today. There were no credit cards in the company. There was minimal record keeping. There was a handful of employees at the time. And it was really in the foundational stage of trying to figure out what direction the company was going to go. And it was really just interesting to see how much was in play, because yeah, we're seeing these interactions with other companies, but it's like picking and choosing, what do we want to do? And like we'd worked with MGP, Tennessee Distilling, we'd worked with Green River, we've worked with a bunch of different other producers on the production side. We've seen the way public companies exchange inventory, but it was how do we learn from that and actually implement that into our products? And I mean, we've been working with Green River for a long time, but it wasn't until last year that we actually finalized our long-term production contracts with them. And the backstory of the products that you're tasting now is, so for a year and a day, everything lives in Kentucky. So for those that want to insist that bourbon has to come from Kentucky, instead of just arguing, you just nod and say, you're right, it does. And okay, so
You're
you
smart
check
if
the
you
box.
do that, though. You're smart.
Yeah. So sometimes if you've been repeating yourself for 3 hours straight, it's just easier to say, you're right. But so year and a day in Kentucky, check the box, Kentucky bourbon. So you've got Kentucky limestone water, DSP Kentucky 10. What became super important, especially as the market changed, was really also after Bardstown acquired Green River, was their access to cooperage. So when they're buying 250, 300,000 barrels a year, we don't have to worry about not having cooperage. And that put us in a position that most craft distillers certainly are not. And also like the price stability we have because of the volume we're buying at, really haven't seen a lot of those fluctuations that a lot of people were experiencing. But after a year and a day, the barrels come to Memphis to age, then they're blended, bottled, all distribution. So we've got corporate offices upstairs in our 29,000 square foot main site, activating another 80,000 square feet currently. But what initially started as, I would say, a combination of marketing and branding really became a true identity for what we're doing with the product to make it unique. So the business side of it was, at the time, Kentucky would tax you on your barrel inventory. Tennessee didn't. I guess Jack Daniels had a lot better lobbyists, but for whatever reason, that was the rule in Tennessee. So there was a business reason for that. But then we discovered where we're located in Memphis is north of downtown. So directly to our north is the Wolf River, directly to our west is the Mississippi. And we found that even though most people associate Memphis, they understand the heat, they understand the humidity, that small area was even more humid and had more temperature changes than the rest of Memphis. And it was really when I was going to work way earlier than I should have, at like 3 o'clock in the morning, on a pretty regular basis, that you realize when I would drive from out east to where we're at, the temperature would be pretty much constant. About a mile and a half out, the temperature drops about 5 degrees every single morning. And you come out of that hole and it starts to climb again going towards downtown. But what also happened was our humidity is even higher. Just because of the confluence of those rivers, there's a lot more built up humidity, and then also really good airflow coming off the river. All those things are incredible for long-term aging. But what it actually came down to was barrels being in Memphis versus being in Kentucky, we got 2 months more of active aging per year. And it's not an exact science, but effectively, once you hit 45 degrees, the bourbon oak interaction ceases. So the longer that you can stay above that, the more interaction you're ultimately having, higher humidity, barrel seals better. You've got less angel share, deeper penetration to the oak, 2 months more per year longer. You're actually getting a pretty uniquely different product. Then you also tap into, for the products that are proof, so the rye, the juke joint, the crossroads, you're tapping into some of the purest water on earth, definitely the purest water in the United States. And once again, that's not marketing, that's just science. The Sands Aquifer is the purest water possible that we could be tapping into. And that's multi-thousand-year-old limestone filtered water that is located beneath Memphis, not from the Mississippi.
I don't think you want to claim that you're getting water out of the Mississippi.
It would certainly help with the color. You wouldn't have to age nearly as long. But, man,
it is
would,
kind of a brownish hue, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. But it was really taking all those pieces together, then the name tying back to Memphis, its place in blues music being so foundational to so many modern music categories today. The note itself intended to stand out from everything around it. There's so many parallels between music notes, tasting notes, music staves, barrel staves. You can kind of go on and on and on. But it was pulling all that together, and it certainly evolved over time. I mean, the packaging today looks different than it did in 21. It'll look different a year from now. I hope we're close to the final-ish versions of package changes. But I mean, it's a very much a living product. And I think what's really cool to have seen with especially San Francisco is, even though it's evolving, it's consistently being called out as great year after year after year. And it's not one of those products where you're literally just submitting the same thing over and over. Like a great example is when that number 7 for Whiskey Advocate was chosen, one of our marketing guys, who's now our marketing manager, literally just went down to the bottling line the day, grabbed a bottle off the line and just shipped it off. Like, it wasn't a curated bottle. It wasn't something that you'll never find on the shelf. Like, maybe you won't find that exact barrel, but you'll find something that could be in line with it. The Juke, the Crossroads, theoretically, hopefully, you should be able to find it on every shelf in the states we're distributed in. And it was taking all of that and then putting in a package that was at a price point that did not go the direction that the market was going. And it was a very difficult business decision at the time because it cost us a lot of money. Early stage company, we are burning a lot of money to maintain those price points when you're looking at sales, marketing, things like that. But it ultimately has started to prove out really over the last year of that price point having longevity and not trying to sell a 4-year-old, 5-year-old bottle for $150 on the shelf because you might buy it once, you're probably not going to buy it again.
Yeah. So let's press into that one a little
Yep.
bit there, right? Because obviously, as demand increases, right, your economics come down a little bit. But
Yep.
when you're saying, what it costs to you all, you're like, hey, this is where we need to sit. So where do your all's price points sit on your core lineup? So let's talk about the Blue Note Rye,
Yep.
the Blue Note Juke Joint, and the Crossroads.
Yep. So the Juke Joint and the Rye, both 93 proof products, should sit somewhere between a 30 and 35, depending on who's buying different case volumes. Obviously, the larger volume, the lower the price. The Crossroads, you're going to jump up to a $45 price point, and the uncut, whether that's the cast strength blend or the single barrel, should sit around $49 in most markets. So really focusing on that $30 to $50 price range, which has longevity from a volume perspective, but also it really stood out over the last few years.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting that that's considered premium, right? Like,
Yep.
like
Oh,
that's
yeah.
that's so funny
Yep.
because there's so many whiskeys below that price point.
Yep.
And Scott, we finally found a brand that you can enjoy in your price range.
Yeah, and to hear that, you went the opposite way that we hear all the time.
Yep.
The younger product gets more expensive.
Yep.
And it just doesn't.
Yeah.
Doesn't
No, I
make
mean,
sense
the basic economics of that when you're trying to sell it, it's just like, why would I pay more just because you can't make it work? And I mean, I understand it. Like it is very hard. You have to have people that are willing to back you through what is a multi-year process of you hope that it works out. And ultimately you're waiting for the market to communicate that it is working. Luckily we got to that point and the answer was yes. But I mean, it is a big ask of the company, its investors to go on this trip. And with bourbon in particular, when you're making inventory decisions 20 years from today based off something that doesn't even exist in the market, the complications associated with that are unlike anything else I've ever seen before.
Yeah.
it's playing the long game.
Yeah. For sure. It's a inverse hockey stick, right? Like you're looking at the negative from a pricing perspective until your sales meets volume and where you break even to then hopefully flip the hockey stick in an exponential growth perspective.
Yep. Yeah. And what's unique too is so you've got the efficiencies, economies of scale, but then you also have just the time factor.
Yeah.
Of like the stuff that you've been laying down and aging finally really getting to the point where you truly start to recognize that. And I mean, if you're 4+ years, you've put millions, tens of millions, sometimes even more than that into just inventory. That's not even payroll. That's not sales. That's not marketing. You literally have millions and millions of dollars just sitting there.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing that's hard is, because I have an econ degree as my first one, so we will speak in generalities here. But this is the stuff that I think people understand. Like your cost of goods sold or COGS has changed exponentially over the time you started through COVID, right? And I think that's finding the right partner, like a Bardstown Bourbon Company, Green River, is huge in that way because you can predict your COGS a little bit better versus, if you're hodgepodging where your contract distillation is that doesn't have access to barrels or can't guarantee you that run rate, you're going to get, different economies of scale and you're going to get different barrel prices. What's their cooperage that they're using? Because we all know that the cost of a barrel, skyrocketed to $1,000 plus during COVID.
Yeah.
And that's
no,
wild.
I mean, what's crazy too, and a lot of people don't talk about this, but I find it fascinating. So a lot of people are aware bourbon is the first chain in so many other spirits, whether it's scotch, tequila, or rum. But it's how has bourbon impacted that? And it's not just how is it yet, how is it impacting it going forward? And I always look at, so we used to sell full tractor trailer loads of empty barrels. Pre-pandemic, maybe $20 a barrel. We're getting $200 a barrel for that exact same empty today. And also, we used to sell them to Scotland. We used to sell them down to Mexico. They're not going to Scotland. They're not going to Mexico. They're staying in the US today and they're being recoopered. So, like, it's just interesting to see how there's these pain points of cooperage domestically, but it is going to impact the rest of spirits at some point. How much ultimately you don't know until the wave hits. But it has been an interesting phenomenon to see. But I mean, it's an interesting point on the COGS, and it is something that is very rare in what we were able to do. So when the pandemic started, previously we'd been working with brokers for things like glass, stoppers, etc. When the pandemic happened, they were not able to keep up with our demand. And usually what happens if you're working with a manufacturer, they will not ever sell to you if you have a relationship with a broker that they're already doing business with, because they're already selling it to the broker. Well, we were lucky enough and a large enough customer that we could go direct to manufacturer. So we didn't have any glass interruptions. Well, we spent millions of dollars to get glass, but we didn't have any glass interruptions. And it is crazy how, like, the dry goods, we didn't really see a negative price change because we bought it before the prices increased in such volumes that our prices actually fell on the dry good components. And it was it was very strange to see so many of these other people just being hammered on some of these things. But I remember it was before anything started to shut down in the US. We started to have some of these conversations because it was just like these random echoes of like, oh, something is happening. We're not really sure what. And I remember going to our head of sales at the time. You're like, what is your plan if your sales force can never go into the market? They're like, what do you mean? And this was, I think, weeks before anything actually shut down the US. And they're like, well, like, I have literally no idea what we would do. Well, we found out pretty quickly afterwards what you end up doing. But it was that forethought of just like that situation applied to so many different situations in the business where luck or whatever you call it, we've been able to stay ahead of it. And I think with the Bardstown Green River relationship in particular, there's a lot of cooperage. There's a lot of new fill stuff coming online. I mean, Kentucky's adding probably $1 million a million barrels of capacity in the next year or so. But it's the thing that we really like about Green River is I know what the product tastes like. And the value that adds is immense. And with the backing of Bardstown, the backing of Pritzker, of having the capital and the knowledge behind it, is something that really we haven't found in the rest of the industry. And it's not that the other producers won't be successful. Some of them certainly will be. But the learning curve associated with setting up a new facility from scratch is substantial. And you can have every expert in the world look at it involved in the engineering construction, and it sometimes just doesn't work. And it can take years to figure that out. And just not to have to worry about at this point really is something that made us really appreciate this Bardstown Green River relationship.
Mm. Speaking of that, do you all have a head blender, head distiller, head anything that would work with those folks?
So what is really, I think, pretty unique about our company is we don't have a master blender. We have sort of, I would say, a consensus, but who's involved in that group changes. So a lot of times it'll be operations or myself or whoever will go down and pull samples. And if there's people upstairs in the office, whether that's marketing, finance, operations, we'll just taste through it up there. And then if there's some people that are normally involved in bottling or on the operation side downstairs, they happen to be upstairs, they'll taste through it too. And then if we like what we're tasting, then we'll take it downstairs, they'll taste through it. If there's salespeople coming through, they'll taste through it. And it's just that rotation of different people with different palates at different times of the day, I think has really benefited us in that we get some really honest feedback from people. And whether it's what they're saying or what's fun is we're working on a project right now, and one of the ladies tasting is like, I like it. And I'm like, your facial expression says otherwise.
Yeah.
So just like having that ability to get that interaction from people that are not industry experts. And another thing that people may not understand is, aside from our sales force and now some of our marketing is getting there, but nobody from an operation standpoint has any prior industry experience whatsoever. Like maybe they were a bartender, worked in restaurants, but absolutely nothing when it comes to the spirit side. And we certainly learned, we've made mistakes along the way, but we've created some pretty unique processes that others don't do. And I think it comes through in the product. And talking to some people tonight that were in town, what I'm proud to say about us is we've been lucky enough not to have to push something to market that isn't good. Some people don't have that ability. It's if you've got $5,000-$10,000 sitting in a barrel that you spent years on, it's got to go to market whether or not it's good. And we have stuff in our R&D section that is absolutely terrible. No one will ever taste it, aside from the few people that were unlucky enough at work to taste through those products, because it is R&D. It doesn't always work. 90% of an R&D batch might, the last 10% just fails. And it's just that learning curve associated with the business and learning not to rush it. And I mean, some of the stuff we do from secondary finishing is 3-4+ years of secondary finishing to figure it out and make sure it actually works. Nothing else in this business is simple. I don't know why product development should be simple and an overnight thing either.
Well, I think with your price point too, I think that approach makes a lot of sense, because we look at all these brands that they have expert panels.
Yep.
And we know that what they're looking for.
Yep.
They're looking for a straight across the top, this is bourbon.
Yep.
But is that what all consumers are looking for? Is that what the modern consumer is looking for? Is the modern consumer looking for 130 proof whiskey? Or are they looking for an 80 proof whiskey? Or are they looking for something a little bit more in the middle?
Yeah.
And then when you bring out something that's not super premium, that's not over the top and $100 or whatever, that the normal consumer can just pick up and enjoy, either on the rocks or neat or in a cocktail, whatever.
Yep.
You kind of want that balanced approach, I guess.
Yep. Well, and one of the other things that's hard too is, who are you listening to around the direction you're going? Because if you're always chasing the thing that people are talking about, likelihood is by the time you go to market, somebody else has probably already done it or done it better. And that's where it's if you look at a lot of our products, it's sort of the fundamentals, and it's making sure you're doing that right. So like we did a special reserve release last year, which was sort of our first foray into some of these secondary finishings, really getting some unique blending together. Luckily, that one worked out. There was a lot of work that went into it. Whiskey Advocate rated, I think, one of its top 50 bourbons they've ever tasted. So it's like you have that piece of it, which is really fun to see, but it's having the thing that people may not talk about, juke joint, just a 93 proof bourbon, but it's a great bourbon that they might drink at home. Or the rye, they may not talk about it in a group, but it's the one they drink at home. And it's like having the ability to target the segment that's actually being consumed, which may or may not always coincide with what people are talking about. You try not to get out over your skis, but it's a challenge to make sure you're headed in the right direction.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. And you all have had some forethought though, right? So, you have not done like Umbriana, thank the gods.
In R&D, we have.
Good.
No one's tasted it.
I'm glad that it's in R&D. That is one thing that I long live the death of Umbriana casks here on the Bourbon Lens. And for everyone I've tasted, I've given you an honest review. But you all have gotten ahead of the game on pickleball, right?
Yep.
So America's fastest growing sport, you all are like, hey, what do we sponsor? Do we sponsor a car? Do we sponsor, a jogger running marathons, or a gymnast, or the Bourbon Lens podcast? No, pickleball. So why pickleball?
Yeah. So
do you play?
Well, no, honestly, I don't have time. I need to at some point. Um, but what was interesting about this is we get people that approach us on a very regular basis of you could sponsor this, you could sponsor that. It's only $1 million. Of course it's worth it. Um, it's extremely rare to come across a sponsorship opportunity that actually makes sense for your company, hits the right demographics, whether that's income, age range, whatever. So that was like the first check the box. And then it was, okay, the marketing team had vetted it and they're like, we think there might be something to this. And it was, okay, maybe this is one of the things that we should go down the road of, but maybe not. And I was down in Tampa at a bourbon event, and like everybody around us in the morning was talking about pickleball. I'm like, okay. Come back to Memphis. I'm meeting with one of our board members at this little diner in Memphis, and this group of elderly men, or it's like their weekly meeting, they're just sitting there talking about pickleball. I'm like, okay, like very different markets, very different age ranges, but yet the thing they're talking about unprovoked is pickleball. So it's like, okay, let's look at this a little bit more. Our marketing team has some longstanding relationships with some of the people that are now with the MLP. And really, what they were able to do is because they're in the early stages of really crafting what the MLP is going to be from like an organization. We had a high degree of flexibility to do the things we want to do, not the things we want to do, set up a multi-year arrangement with them. And it's really worked out well. But it's also like that marketing spend is worthless unless we have the salespeople to actually communicate that to the market.
Yeah.
And where we've seen the big benefit is where the sales force is able to come in and piggyback off of those market activations. So it's the stores are aware of so many of their consumers are engaged with pickleball. So it's okay, you're getting these case stacks in these stores, you're getting market activations, you're getting key people to interact with players, they're going to clinics, you're doing all this sort of stuff. But then it's also, as a brand, you have to focus on so many different segments of marketing. And it's you've got at the high level, you're looking for just general awareness. So pickleball sponsorship is part of that, just high level awareness. And then it's these different levels of interaction and activation is where you're driving it down to a more local level. And just the ability to do that is extremely rare in all the pitches that we've seen made to us for years now. And it was really great to see. We're in the early days of this partnership, but luckily it's a multi-year partnership we have with them.
Well, and lucky for you, many NBA stars have invested in pickleball. So, rub elbows with the right people.
That's what's amazing is the people that have gotten in on the ownership group are like very enthusiastic about the expansion of this league. And it's something that like people, they talk about how pickleball is aging backwards, that the people are getting younger and younger. And whenever that happens, you have a lot more longevity of a sport. And it's also a sport where, yes, you're going to have like tennis elbow injuries like that, but like you're not going to have like concussion protocols like like NFL has to deal with and all these other sports. And so many people that have played sports like that are being less and less, okay with their kids playing some of those contact sports. So it'll be interesting to see how it changes over the years.
Yeah.
Jake, what's your pickleball record currently?
Undefeated, because I've not played a game.
Same here. Same here.
But so in all fairness, Scott, you don't have you are very lucky because there's a giant pickleball place that is replaced a golf course right down the street in Louisville from you. And so they have a bar and they have like 25 or 30 courts that they've turned into this whole thing in Louisville. So I think there'll be more and more places like that. I think Louisville could host a pickleball tournament in the near future. We got a lot of courts. It's a very interesting sport. It's not like tennis. I'm not good at tennis either, or table tennis, or anything like that. So maybe I could be better at pickleball, but balls moving towards me that I have to hit, whether it's baseball, tennis, pickleball.
Avoid at all costs.
Not a fan. I can hit a stationary ball called golf. I can catch a football because I played it for many years. I could catch a basketball. I played that for many years. Was not coordinated with the whole like slap a ball deal.
Here's the ultimate question. Does Blue Note bourbon make you better at pickleball?
The answer has to be yes.
It has to be.
Yep.
I feel like I'd be better at pickleball now than I was at the beginning of this podcast because I've enjoyed some juke joint and crossroads.
Yeah, you loosen up a little bit. Yeah.
It was funny. Some of our sales force was down at the Atlanta event, and they're playing with like the actual players, and they're just like, "Holy crap!" It's a good reality check of how out of shape people are that are not actively engaged in sports.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But the good thing is because bourbon is technically only calories, like on the back end from a nutritional perspective, it's a great way to replenish afterwards. So hydrate with some water and then have a bourbon. It's better than a beer. Beer's too filling and gross after a sporting event, but a nice, glass of Blue Note after your pickleball would be great. And that is called marketing for free. So you're welcome. But as we wrap up, I think for today, we've got a good picture of who you are. Now, the question is what you will look like in 5 years. We don't know, but we will definitely be finding out. But Logan, where can people find out more about Blue Note? Where can they, make sure they're keeping up to date on all the R&D stuff that you have going on so that they're getting first and foremost news on what's happening?
Yep. So our socials, so Blue Note Bourbon on Instagram, Facebook. We also our website. We've got email subscription list that we're working to hopefully activate that email subscription where people are actually getting regular updates. It's available for sale online, plus the 17, maybe 20 states that we're distributed in currently. If people look for us, they'll be able to find updates on what we're doing.
Well, I'm excited for y'all's future. It sounds like y'all are laying down a crap ton of barrels, and
there's a lot.
It's Kentucky, so even better, right, Scott?
Yep, absolutely.
We appreciate you hanging out with us late this evening. I know it's a little bit earlier there in Memphis, but we really appreciate it. And thanks for sending us some whiskey so we could try it and enjoy it. So until next time, guys, cheers.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Bourbon Lens. Make sure you're connected with Scott and I via social media on Instagram, X, and Facebook. We'd love to connect. And if you're more the professional type, follow us over on LinkedIn. If you want to know more about Bourbon Lens, make sure you're subscribed to our weekly newsletter, The Weekly Pour. For exclusive content and more, check out Patreon. Follow us there at Bourbon Lens. And last but not least, on your favorite podcast listening app, make sure you're subscribed because every Monday, Scott and I release a podcast, and we would love to have you here listening to the newest features and the newest whiskey news. And until next time, cheers.